This talk was given by Roshi Rafe Martin, guiding teacher of the Endless Path Zendo, a lay Buddhist community in Rochester, New York. Join our practice, in person or online, at endlesspathzendo.org.
Today is Saturday, October 5th, and today we have a half-day Zazen Kai in honor of Bodhidharma, the great founding teacher. Without Bodhidharma, there would be no Zen. Simple as that. So we owe him everything. Let me turn this around for 1 second so people on Zoom can see the altar set up with Bodhidharma on it. And today's Teisho, of course, will be on Bodhidharma, specifically case 41 in the Gateless Barrier, Bodhidharma and peace of mind. I mean, that's the whole deal in a nutshell, really, isn't it? Peace of mind. What does that mean? So here's the case. Bodhidharma sat facing the wall. The second ancestor, that's Huike, as we'll discover, Japanese, that would be Eka, having cut off his arm, stood there in the snow. He said, "Your disciple's mind has no peace as yet. I beg you, Master, to please put it to rest." Bodhidharma said, "Bring me your mind, and I will put it to rest." The second ancestor said, "I have searched for my mind, but I cannot find it." Bodhidharma said, "Then I have completely put it to rest for you." Wumen's commentary: the broken-toothed old foreigner proudly came over 100,000 miles across the sea. This was like raising waves where there is no wind. Bodhidharma could enlighten only one disciple, and even he was a cripple, as you'll see. Well, Shensan Lang does not know 4 words. Wumen's verse. Shensan Lang, by the way, was a folkloric fisherman who was superb as a fisherman, but was illiterate. So Wumen here, this is a note, is calling our attention to the failure of words and abstractions to truly transform our lives. Here's this guy who was illiterate, and yet he caught plenty of fish. So Wumen's verse, coming from the West and directly pointing, this great affair was caused by the transmission, that is, from Bodhidharma to Huike, the second ancestor. The troublemakers who created the stir in Zen circles are, after all, these two. So, 1,500 years or so ago, an already old Buddhist teacher, Bodhidharma, an ex-Indian prince, set sail over the seas and made what was then a dangerous ocean crossing from southern India to China. Once he arrived directly pointing to mind itself without dependence on special words or canonized holy texts, he opened the gateless gate of Zen. Ever since then, Bodhidharma's 4 principles are said to have been as follows: a special transmission, that is of the Buddhist teachings, outside sutras, no dependence on words and phrases, directly pointing to the human mind, seeing into one's nature, and attaining Buddhahood. A special transmission outside sutras, no dependence on words and phrases, directly pointing to the human mind, seeing into one's nature, and attaining Buddhahood. This differed considerably from other schools of Buddhist practice current in China in the early 6th century. Rather than adding good things like wisdom and compassion to us, Bodhidharma's Zen took everything away, all to help us realize our own original mind of wisdom and compassion. Caught up in unconscious dualistic habits of self-oriented thought, we've forgotten that this selfless mind is already ours. Zen Master Wu Men, compiler of the Gateless Barrier, some 500 or 600 years after Bodhidharma, wrote, "Because it is so very clear, it takes so long to realize." That's from case 7 of the Gateless Barrier. Because it is so very clear, it takes so long to realize. So while it's simple, it's not easy to realize this. Leonard Cohen wrote, "Some people say it's empty, but that doesn't mean it's light." Some people say it's empty, but that doesn't mean it's light. And that's from the song "The Street" by Leonard Cohen. Bodhidharma and Huike, the second ancestor, demonstrate how this goes. Paradoxically, genuine peace can only begin with recognition of unpeace. Starting Zazen, we may in time be dismayed to see how jumpy, inattentive, scattered, and self-absorbed our minds actually are. How terribly unpeaceful. It can seem that our very search for truth is leading us in the wrong direction. Roshi Kapleau used to say a Zen Buddhist really needs only one article of faith or belief, namely that the Buddha wasn't a fool or a liar, when upon his great enlightenment he exclaimed, "Wonder of wonders, all beings are already Buddha. Only their habit of self-centered, delusive thinking prevents their realization of this." Typically, after saying this, Roshi Kapleau would then add that once we accept this, we almost have to become motivated to find out what the Buddha was talking about for ourselves. This is our Zen practice. All beings, we think, includes me. But how can I be a Buddha? I'm filled with anxiety, self-concern, and self-centeredness, with jealousy, pettiness, and anger. Plus, how can people whose behavior and beliefs I find abhorrent be Buddhas? Racists, misogynists, homophobes, climate deniers, dictators are Buddhas? Really? What did the Buddha mean? The Buddha's legendary words can help us keep going. When after an initial burst of enthusiasm for practice, "Hey, I'm meditating, it's great," we start to encounter not peace and joy, but unrest, arising out of a growing awareness of what our minds are actually up to, minute by minute. Roshi Kapleau used to describe this as, in the beginning it's roses, roses, roses. Later it's thorns, thorns, thorns. The good news is that really seeing what our minds are doing without suppression or evasion, while humbling, is the beginning of freeing ourselves from old habits and shortcomings. Still, after a nice start, we may begin to see how much work there is to do. What were once philosophical or academic questions become startlingly personal. If I'm a Buddha, then where is my insight? Where is my peace? We begin to really ask. Where is my wisdom, my courage, my compassion? Where is this enlightened me, Zen Buddhism says, I already have or am? It is the awakening of real questioning into the nature of our own life. With blinders stripped away, we find that we ourselves are all Huike, standing in the snow, our minds not yet at peace, but earnestly seeking peace. Doubt is faith, Doubt is faith in action. Faith is the ground of doubt. It is not simple skepticism. Just a dry throat. Zen isn't going to help us avoid difficult questions. That's not the kind of peace that Zen is going to offer. Rather, if we want real peace, we're going to have to plunge into the questions that disturb us most. Why is there injustice? Why is there so much greed and evil? Why do we have endless wars and climate destruction? Why misogyny, cruelty, racism? Why suffering? Why even birth and death? Specifically, why was I born? Why am I here? And why must I, me, myself, and precious I, age and die? What is the root of it all? Huike, a Buddhist monk, had read and studied, meditated, and chanted. Yet he was honest enough to acknowledge that despite all that, his mind was not yet at peace. When he heard of this teacher, Bodhidharma, newly arrived in China from India, the land of the Buddha, he experienced an upsurge of faith and set off to find him. Yet the story of his meeting with his life-changing teacher-to-be, the ex-Indian prince Bodhidharma, seems rather excessive, doesn't it? It's reminiscent of some old Jataka tale in which the Buddha, in some far distant past life, gives his flesh or eyes to a beggar or his body to a starving tigress. Huike, desperate for truth, cuts off an arm to gain Bodhidharma's teaching. Yikes! What does it take to work with a teacher? How dramatic does it have to be? Need we make a show of it to impress the teacher, our peers, or ourselves? Need it be that dramatic? Letting go of what's no longer needed, cutting off wasteful or destructive habits, setting time aside for zazen, for coming to Teisho, Doksan, Zazenkai, ceremony, and sesshin, is a realistic way of cutting off an arm. That is, it's a way to realistically do what we can to find genuine peace, not just the Band-Aid called calm, but the peace of knowing who and what we are, the peace beyond all understanding. What a teacher looks for is sincerity. Are we sincerely acting on our aspiration to practice? Or are we just offering lip service? In the early days of Zen practice in Rochester, when we were young and fed ourselves on classic Zen stories of monks and nuns who did wild things to gain, and I put that in quotes, gain, enlightenment, we also did crazy things in imitation of their excesses, like not sleeping more than 20 minutes in a full 7-day sesshin, or sitting a 7-day sesshin in full lotus despite the pain, or walking barefoot on gravel in ice and snow to stay awake all night during sesshin. Then again, back then, no one had careers or committed relationships or children. Well, most of us. Rose and I were married and had an infant child when we arrived, and so along with one or two other couples, we were exceptions. But most were free to imitate the monks and nuns of old. It was immature. Then again, very few had matured to the point where they had lives that meant something even to themselves. We were all very young. Well, this was misguided, at the same time doing some of these things, and yes, as lay people, even we did it too. Such were our early times in Western Zen. We discovered that we were capable of a lot more than we thought or had been conditioned to believe. In the Three Pillars of Zen, Philip Kapleau, after experiencing heavy physical makyo during an early sesshin in Japan, reports being told, "You are more strong than you know, Kapleau-san." Amen. All beings are Buddha. This is no joke. Cutting off the proverbial arm is where it gets real. Letting go of what is lesser, we work to realize what is greater. Committing to the count, the breath, the koan, is our version of sitting in the snow. We no longer drift along, but move against the habitual flow of old self-centered habits. While we don't literally cut off an arm, and the koan case is not suggesting that we should, we do cut off what we may at least initially hold as dear, our me-oriented, self-centered habits of mind and behavior. How? Not by suppressing or blocking them, not by pretending they aren't there and bypassing them, but by seeing them so clearly. In time, they lose their grip. It takes work. It takes attention, attention, attention. We accomplish this by practicing attention to the breath, to the count of 1, 2, up to 10, and then back to 1. By fully sitting, by absorbing ourselves in mu or other koans so completely that our habitual self-looping mind and habits fall away, and wind, rain, stars, moon, dust, street noises all walk in. We do it by showing up for the actualities of practice, inconvenient as they may be. In an email conversation with James Ford Roshi, he presented to me the essence of the way as waking up and growing up, to which I agreed, telling him I felt it was a great summation of the Bodhisattva path. But I added that it was missing one thing, showing up, to which he agreed. So the Zen path, the way of the Bodhisattva, the way created by Bodhidharma, stripped down to its essence, is showing up, waking up, growing up. It can be a sacrifice. But isn't that to be expected? The writer and pioneering aviator Antoine de Saint-Exupéry wrote after piloting a reconnaissance mission during World War II that he'd never expected to survive. He wrote, if we are to clothe ourselves in these higher beings, we must begin by creating them within ourselves. The being of which we claim to form part is created within us, not by words, but only by acts. A being is not subject to the empire of language, but only to the empire of acts. The essential act possesses a name. Its name is sacrifice. Sacrifice signifies neither amputation nor repentance. It is in essence an act. It is the gift of oneself to the being of which one forms part. Only he can understand what a farm is, what a country is, who shall have sacrificed part of himself to his farm or country, fought to save it, struggled to make it beautiful. Only then will the love of farm or country fill his heart. A country or a farm is not the sum of its parts. It is the sum of its gifts. That's in his book, Flight to Arras. We might add, this is how a Sangha is created, or how our own maturing Zen practice takes form. Transformation requires effort. Yamada Roshi said that the essence of Zen is the maturing of character. Capra Roshi often said to accomplish a certain goal, you must become a certain person. But once you have become such a person, you no longer need to attain that goal. To accomplish a certain goal, you must become a certain person. But once you have become such a person, you no longer need to attain that goal. There is a necessary rigor to genuine practice. We are not joining a social club. We are vowing and committing together to actualize the realization of practice for the benefit of all. Practicing sincerely opens us to intimacy with raindrops and falling leaves, with painful things and happy things, with angry faces and with joyous faces, with trees, crows, and cats, With the waning of COVID's death threat, we have found a new challenge. Zoom has become, really become, a lifesaver, literally. Yet this gift can, like all habits, become a zone of convenience and inertia. So, to add to our list of ordinary expressions of cutting off an arm, we now have coming to the Zendo in person, literally showing up. Again, this depends on one's life circumstances. So, this is all to be taken with how does this work for me? Don't turn it into some extreme maxim. However, I will tell you that Sunyana Graf Roshi of the Vermont Zen Center insists that students who live within a 9-hour drive of the Vermont Zen Center must come to sesshin in person. They cannot come any longer by Zoom. If we are local, coming in person means stepping out of the domain of me and my into Sangha, into a temple dedicated to Buddha and Dharma. There is value in showing up, growth value, maturing value. The inconvenience or discomfort involved deepens and strengthens us because it means we've had to consciously make the effort, had to decide to carve out space and time to really show up. This is Huike in the snow, cutting off an arm. This is our way of saying, I mean it for real. But again, please be aware of your own life circumstances and how to work with this. Poet Robert Bly, founder of the men's movement, so active in the 80s and 90s, said in a workshop I once attended with him, if you just go with the flow, you always end up in the bleeping Gulf of Mexico. In short, if you just go with the flow, with what you're familiar with or what carries you along, you end up back in the same old familiar places you've had enough of and are trying to mature beyond. The Zen carp leaps upstream against the flow to become the dragon it has always been. Of course, once again, this doesn't mean act contrary to what your intuition is. It's always more subtle than that. But the general proviso is pay attention and work with, just don't go along with what's going on. Trees that are planted in places too protected from wind and rough weather never have to struggle to get a grip, never twist and turn, and so their roots never get strong or deep. The struggle is what makes a tree solid and secure. When Rose and I were on pilgrimage in China in 2006 with Sunyana Roshi and her Sanghas of Vermont, Toronto, and Costa Rica, we went to Bodhidharma's cave high above Shaolin Temple. We climbed narrow stairs carved into the mountainside, and the cave there up on the top was small, near the top, not at the tip top. Inside, a nun from the nunnery lower down the mountain handed us each a stick of incense to offer to a life-size statue of a swarthily bearded Bodhidharma. With the golden earring in one ear, he lacked only a parrot and a cutlass to be a swashbuckling Dharma pirate. Yet inside that little cave, we felt only peace. Bodhidharma seemed not fierce then, not a spiritual pirate at all, but rather so vastly, wonderfully empty, he was totally at peace with all and everything. There was no sense of separation at all. Maybe it was the Japanese who later made him out to be a tough guy, but I think he was totally clear. And that out of his realization of selfless truth itself rose something so selfless as to be uncompromising. When Emperor Wu did not understand the Zen he offered, Bodhidharma did not stick around to explain and land imperial patronage. He saw what was up and he left. William Blake, in 18th century darkly industrializing England, our Bodhidharma of the West, wrote, "What is the price of experience? Do men buy it for a song or wisdom for a dance in the street? No. It is bought with the price of all that a man hath, his house, his wife, his children. Wisdom is sold in the desolate market where none come to buy, and in the withered field where the farmer plows for bread in vain. What is the price of experience? Do men buy it for a song, or wisdom for a dance in the street? No. It is bought with the price of all that a man hath, his house, his wife, his children. Wisdom is sold in the desolate market where none come to buy, and in the withered field where the farmer plows for bread in vain. William Blake clearly knew about Huike's offering of an arm, but Blake is not telling us to separate ourselves from family, from work, from the responsibility of citizenship or the circle of friends. Rather, he is reminding us that to truly know what's what, we have to at least momentarily release our death grip on all that we've identified with, all that we call me, myself, and I, all dualistic sense of me and here and everything else out there. For beyond that grip of death is life itself. How to do this is what Bodhidharma and Huike Zen is all about. We do it not by adherence to words and letters or holy texts, but by practicing, focusing completely on this breath, this count, this koan. This is buying wisdom with all we have. This is cutting off the arm. Here's Bodhidharma's interview with the emperor. This is Heike Gunroku, Blue Cliff Record, Case 1, Bodhidharma's I Don't Know. Emperor Wu of Liang asked the great master, Bodhidharma, what is the first principle of the holy teachings? Bodhidharma said, emptiness, without holiness. The emperor said, who is standing before me? Bodhidharma replied, I don't know. The emperor did not understand. Thereupon Bodhidharma crossed the Yangtze River and came to the kingdom of Wei. The emperor's question, who is standing before me, sums up his puzzlement. He's asking, but wait, how can you say no holiness? Aren't you a holy man? Bodhidharma's I don't know still echoes through the centuries, retaining its primal power. He is not puzzled. He is not saying, duh, or even admitting, gosh, I'm not sure. I better go meditate some more and find out. Sadly, I've actually heard a contemporary non-koan trained teacher say just that Bodhidharma was saying, gosh, he was so honest. He was saying, I don't know, I better go and find out. I'm going to go up to this cave above Shaolin and meditate for 9 more years, and then I'll know. That's not what he was saying. What was he saying? Is I don't know is the essence of deepest mind. It is the Buddha's wisdom. It is something we each need to find. Times have changed. We don't need to be a snow-sitting, arm-cutting Huike to realize that peace of mind might be a very good thing. Anxiety is us. In addition to the manifold traumas unfolding right now in our culture, on our planet, our ordinary human intelligence, our personally anguished awareness of impermanence and death leads directly to the Buddha's first noble truth, that life as we know it, unawakened life, is filled with anguish. The Buddha didn't invent this. He simply presented his own clear experience of it. Let me add, Joseph Campbell called Buddhism our planetary religion because it's about observation and experience, not belief. This wasn't pessimism, it was realism. In time, the big bad wolf comes to every door and blows the house down, except for the house of brick. How do I build a house like that? What is its secret? Why can't it be blown down? And so our search begins. Bodhidharma and Huike made it clear 1500 years ago and 1,000 years after the Buddha that Buddhist practice is not simply a matter of study or of amassing learning or of gaining merit. At its core, which is where Zen resides, it is a practice of realizing, of actually awakening to mind itself, just like the Buddha himself. Bodhidharma Zen was and is radical in the primary sense of radical, which means root, aiming for the root. He was presenting the Buddha's own profound realization 1,000 years after the fact. He moved the Buddhist teaching from its rather rarefied Indian origins to a direct and down-to-earth practice of realization. It reminded us that if we could only see clearly, we would realize we already had, indeed already were, what we've been searching for. Well, easier said than done. The core delusion of me and here and everyone and everything else out there forms the linchpin of our personal solar system. Our unconscious, unexamined belief that we are the sun and that all others, like so many planets, revolve around us. Of course, life in so many ways, both large and small, is showing us every day that this is not quite so. And because it isn't, our little solar system, no matter how we work at refining it and polishing it, never quite spins true. The Buddhist term for such suffering is dukkha, a term denoting the groaning and grinding of a wheel not spinning smoothly on its axle. That groaning, grinding sound is the sound of our own lack of peace. It is the sound of endless wars, of climate destruction, of racism and misogyny. It is the sound of our waking up at 3 a.m., anxious about death, about the state of our world and the lives of our children. To help us find peace, Bodhidharma demands that we get radical, go to the root, practice realization, and let all else while we sit fall away. Dharma transmission is beyond scriptures. It does not rely on words or letters, but points directly to mind, not intellect, but ordinary, ever-present mind that right now sees colors with the eyes, hears sounds with the ears, thinks thoughts with the brain. This is not anti-intellectualism. Neither Bodhidharma nor Huike were unlearned. It's just that while learning has a deep and valid place in Zen, it is no substitute for personal knowledge of this breath, this morning star, this falling snow, this cold night on the mountainside. The koan of Bodhidharma and his heir, Huike, plunges us into the heart of it. We are not at peace. How shall we find peace? And let's be clear, no teacher, not the Buddha, not Bodhidharma, can give us peace. A teacher can help us find peace if we are willing to do the work. Rather than giving us goodies, Zen strips away what's no longer needed. The process can be uncomfortable and at the same time liberating. Huike was already middle-aged by the time he came to Bodhidharma. He had already fully practiced the Buddhism of his time. He'd studied texts. He'd sat in meditation. He'd been mindful. He'd given up attachments. Yet he knew he was not really at peace. His determination to find peace makes him the archetypal Zen student. His search for his own mind in response to Bodhidharma's instruction to bring it forth so it can be pacified may have taken minutes or hours or years. The koan doesn't say. All we know is that he returned or stepped forward or spoke up and said, I've searched and can't find that mind. That was the outcome. How is this the fulfillment of peace? Wumen's commentary. A broken-toothed old foreigner proudly came over 100,000 miles across the sea. This was like raising waves where there's no wind. Bodhidharma could enlighten only one disciple, and even he was a cripple. Well, well, Shan San Long does not know 4 words. Wumen's ironic language cuts away our attachment to these lofty ancestors. Calling Bodhidharma broken-toothed removes his halo while burnishing his legend, which holds that Buddhist teachers in China, jealous of this newly arrived teacher, tried to poison him, leaving his front teeth chipped. Raising waves where there's no wind is Wu Men's version of why did he bother to make such a big deal over nothing? In short, if we all have, as the Buddha said, this wonderful mind, why go on so dramatically about it? Plus, if it's vast emptiness, no holiness, what's the big deal? How important can nothing be? Raising waves where there's no wind. He also calls Huike a cripple, obviously because he had only one arm, but also perhaps because he couldn't even find his own mind. I mean, man, what a loser. History suggests that, the reality behind this may have been that Huike had lost his arm in an attack by bandits, but it worked well for the legend, and so it was retained. It makes a better story. Finally, Shen Sanglang, a fisherman in Chinese folklore, was illiterate, yet while he knew nothing of words and letters, he still caught plenty of fish. The point is well taken. Attachment to words and letters, to concepts of all sorts, will not necessarily resolve our life doubts or our religious quest. In the end, words and letters can't tell us why we were born, why we must age and inevitably die. All concepts, all philosophies ultimately deconstruct in the end. We can live quite well without clinging to such charms. Illiteracy, however, is not at all the point, far from it. Not knowing, Zen tradition says, is most intimate. Such ironic language is part of Zen tradition and is itself a teaching meant to free us from attachment to even Zen's founding teachers. Zen will not let us settle down with, oh, how great they were, thereby projecting all that wisdom and courage and determination and insight outside ourselves. Instead, inspired by those who came before us, we must aim to accomplish what they accomplished, and then find ways to help others do the same. Unfortunately, such language can be misunderstood and become an imitation of itself. Imitating harshness is fox Zen, tricky, untrustworthy, not genuine. But even back then, some teachers of the past did use what we today consider harsh methods. This is true. But even then, it depended on the student and what might work best for that particular person. It wasn't a method that was just applied to everyone. Then again, let's remember, most disciplines, crafts, etc., in those times were taught through physically and mentally demanding apprenticeships. And Zen, based as it is on direct and personal practice with a teacher, was no different. Yet even way back, great teachers like the Buddha, or like Chao Chu and others, were not harsh at all. I think of Aiken Roshi in our time. There was nothing even remotely harsh about him, yet, nonetheless, in Doksan, he was quite exacting, actually demanding precision in his teaching of the Dharma. The koan's archetype of rigor is accurate. Genuine spiritual practice demands courage, commitment, perseverance. It requires that we carve out the space and time to show up as best we can to do it. This practice is challenging and at times, given our busy lives, inconvenient, but it is transformative. Later on, when Huike himself was a teacher, he wandered among the fish seller stalls, the tea stands, and wine shops, hanging out with all sorts of people. He didn't stay in the monastery or on the mountainside. Upbraided by establishment types for such unconventional behavior, he answered all criticism by saying, as one old tradition quaintly puts it, this is from John Woo's book, The Golden Age of Zen, I do it for the sake of my own soul. I do it for the sake of my own soul. But by that time, as I said, he was no longer up on a bare mountaintop, but down in the busy marketplace like Hotai in the 10th Oxherding picture. Eventually, Huike was murdered by the local governor for preaching this radical new Zen Buddhism. Legend says that his body floated upstream against the current, coming to rest at what came to be known as the Second Ancestor's village. Even today, that entire village community knows and is dedicated to the story and teaching of Huike and Bodhidharma. Rose and I, along with Sunyana Roshi and her Sangha, visited there in 2006. We were the first Westerners to ever be there. The whole village came out to welcome us dressed in the Buddhist robes they'd hidden away during the Cultural Revolution. It was like walking into an old tale and seeing legends spring to life. Woman's verse, coming from the West and directly pointing. This great affair was caused by the transmission. The troublemakers who created the stir in Zen circles are, after all, these two. So southern India is west of China and is literally where Bodhi came from. The mythic implication is also that fierce old Bodhidharma was the Bodhisattva of Avalokiteshvara, come from the Western paradise to aid all living beings. Wumen then adds that since then, anyone practicing Zen will be facing the implications of this encounter of Huike and Bodhidharma. Huike's desperate search and Bodhidharma's uncompromising response are on our plate now. Zen, which began with Bodhidharma, who shifted the Buddha's teaching from the cosmological philosophical to the practical, wants to help us understand our own minds and realize peace. Because of these two, you and I are struggling now with Zen practice, seeking what they sought and what they found. And so we especially honor Bodhidharma for his dedication and compassion. Like John Lewis in our time, Bodhidharma and Huike too didn't hesitate to make good trouble. By doing so, they proved that the Buddha way is not far off. It is not reserved for special people. It is ours by virtue of our own human birthright. At some point, we all come to recognize the difficulties and challenges of this life and are anguished by them. This is our start. To find peace, all we need do then, as Bodhidharma insisted long ago, is simply bring forth our troubled mind so it can be pacified. That shouldn't be too hard to do, should it? We'll stop here. And we will recite our great vows for all, and I will stop the recording and turn the computer around so we all face the Buddha, Avalokiteshvara, and Bodhidharma on the altar.